Anke Ma'at, Hetepu. Today is the first of many to come. I'm starting a new series on the channel called Kemetic Tuesdays, where I want to take some time out to share on some of the revelations that I've gotten as it pertains to the spiritual journey, the sonship journey, the kingdom of God, the empire of God, all this stuff, right? And I wanted to share some of the things that I've uncovered over the last few years of really not just studying the culture, but actually getting up close and personal and really allowing the divine to reveal itself to me through a different culture. There's many teachers who teach the kingdom from a perspective dealing with the Hebraic and even the Greek and the Latin, so on and so forth. But oftentimes the Kemetic is left out. And I've said before, for many people who come from a Christian background or still use or reference the Bible, one of the best ways to really understand what's going on is to pay attention to the cultures that it is based on and the cultures that are mentioned in it as a form of cross referencing, if you would. So that's somewhat of what I'm going to be doing here. No, I'm not going to be Christianizing the Kemetic culture. That's not my goal at all. I myself am not a Christian. What I will be doing is sharing spiritual truths and mechanics as I know them currently. And I figured for this new series, what better way to start this off than to redo one of the first Kemetic sessions that I ever did, which is talking about the journey of Ra on his boat. Because after spending some time in the culture, I believe that I can treat this topic with a bit more justice than I did the first time around. So, first, right, let's talk about the Kemetic culture. Many of you know them as Egyptians. They knew themselves as Kemetiu or the Remech. You know, they had their own names for themselves, but Kemet is pretty much what the land is called in the native language before the Greeks renamed it to Egypt. And in referencing the culture itself, because of an interpretation of the book of Exodus in the Bible, people have this subconscious or very much conscious belief that the Kemetic culture is anti-God, and that's not the case at all. The ancient Kemites or the ancient Egyptians are simply the older cousin of the Hebrew, at least according to the Bible itself. And that's another topic entirely, but they're related and they actually engage the same Elohim, the same family of gods. Now, let's talk about that. So, in the Hebrew tradition, they use the word Elohim. Uh, in the Kemetic culture, they refer to Necher and the Necheru, which is the closest word for God, and the mechanics are pretty much the same. Even though their personal understanding of how to engage these divinities are a bit different than the way that a lot of other cultures go about it. And we might cover that in a different session, but there's a few ways to look at the Netchers, right? In the Hebrew tradition, when paying attention to God, what they would do is they would recognize the different attributes of God and they would give that different names. Now, the Kemetic culture kind of did the same thing, except instead of just naming the different aspects of the divine, they decided to draw them as well and give them a bit more personality. Now, when really looking at the Necheru, there's multiple things that are true at the same time. The Necheru are principles of divinity. These are individual aspects of the divine. Some of them are beings, some of them are, let's just say, descriptors, and you can have multiple descriptors all describing the same entity. So it gets a little complicated, but oftentimes they represent a force out in nature, a force within divinity, something within the self. And in many cases, not just within the self on a metaphysical level, but an organ or a body part, something actually physical within the self. Uh, so it's a very complex system. I often equate the Kemetic culture to chemistry, where if you know what you're looking at, it's just a bunch of formulas and recipes with most of their stories. They're not always trying to tell you a historical narrative. A lot of time they're giving you the blueprint or the recipe to bring about a certain result. So that's just a brief summary. I've done a few videos on that before. Now, what I want to talk about today is Ra and his journey. Now, Ra is known for taking this journey. He hops in his boat. He has a few different boats, and he goes through a journey across the sky, pretty much the heavens, and then he descends. And the idea behind it is the journey of Ra is pretty much matches the journey of the sun every day on a metaphorical sense, where every day Ra travels through the heavens, sharing himself with the world, giving of himself, sharing life, light, and truth, illuminating the heavens. And then he descends into the underworld, where he's actually consumed by his enemy, Apep. Apep is described as this giant serpent, which represents Isfet or evil. Apep represents a lot, not just Isfet and evil, but more so the idea of carnality within the world. We're going to come back to Apep. So depending on the narrative, it'll just be Ra fights against Apep, and then he gets swallowed by Apep, and then he comes out of Apep. Or it's he travels through the heavens and then goes into the underworld just as a regular cycle. Just depends on how you look at which myth at which time they're talking about something different. So within this journey, right, Ra wages battle against Apep. And Ra usually does not travel alone. Let me show you a few pictures of Ra. All right, so here we have Ra. Ra is depicted as usually an elderly man, but a man nonetheless, with a falcon head most of the time, carrying the sun disk with the cobra wrapped around it. Now, all of these artistic designs all represent something different. And throughout this series that I'm going to be doing, I'm going to have ample time to talk about what all the different illustrative choices really represent, at least some of what they represent. Now, in this case, Ra, he carries the sun disk on his head. The sun disk doesn't really represent the sun. The sun more so is a representation itself. So a common misconception is that the Kemites worship the sun. They more so just use the sun to talk about the divine because they were comfortable viewing nature and recognizing God within it. So when using the sun, they saw it as a source of light. So when they looked at the sun, they said, okay, this is a good stand-in for our God. We can't capture God. We need God. God is pouring out. Everything we have is because of God. That's kind of the idea behind the sun. It represents divinity. It represents life. It represents power, authority, kingship in a lot of ways. It's a sense of dominion in it, amongst other things. The falcon is often used as it pretty much represents the Most High in most cases, because the falcon is pretty much the ruler of the air, the ruler of the sky, which is the ruler of the heavens. Falcons go unchecked. The fastest, if not one of the fastest creatures on the planet. Falcons deserve their own video. But it represents pretty much the ruler of the heavens. This is a heavenly entity that you're experiencing whenever you see the falcon motif. Now, Ra in general, just like the sun, because the name Ra means sun, he represents the same thing. Ra represents pretty much the Lord of the heavens and the giver or the source of all things is kind of what you get. He represents divine consciousness, the state of being a divinity. And it's from Ra that all the other divinities come from. So I want to take a look. Now, remember I said that when Ra's on his journey, he actually has a few other people with him. So over here, you can see you have Set, Het Heru, Ma'at, Tahuti, and Ra. Now, I want to emphasize one thing, right? You have Ra over here. He's seated in his journey in the heavens. Here we go, seated in heavenly places, powerful on its own. what I want to draw attention to is that way over here you have Set, which is, let's just say, the progenitor of the Christian idea of Satan in many ways. He represents chaos, evil, the ego in his own right, but he's still an agent of divinity. He's fighting for the throne. He fights for he who sits on the throne or she who sits on the throne. He defends the family of gods. He's not really their enemy all too much. He plays a very important role. And you see that he pretty much acts as a principle of separation and division. So pretty much he's on the front lines defending the rest from a pep, massive serpent here. And you almost get the idea of, well, you need someone chaotic to fight against the chaos. So Set in many ways just represents our survival instinct. It's the things that we need to do in order to survive. Those carnal things, those egoic things that our lower self needs to exist. Now, again, Rod goes on this journey every day. Every single day, Rod goes on this journey. He's fighting against a pep over and over again because what he wants to do, he's a philanthropist. Perfect picture of kingship. He wants to give of himself in every realm that he's in. Now, one of the things that you'll notice as you begin to study the culture is that Ra actually takes on different forms at different parts of the day. So at the beginning of the day, in the morning time, right, he's known as Khepera, which is the emerging one, the evolving one, the resurrected one. Then he moves into, let's just say, Atum Ra or Aten Ra, and then he'll move over to Amun Ra at the end. Now, and different stories kind of mix some of those around. Sometimes you'll see one and not the other. But pretty much he goes through a process of being the principle of divinity when it's first starting to express itself, to being on full display, and then on its way out, it starts to dim again before going completely dark. So nighttime was seen as the time when God wasn't around. God still exists, but God is currently unseen. And that's an aspect of divinity, even displayed by Ra, that it goes through periods of being seen and unseen. There's aspects of divinity that can be seen. There's aspects that cannot be seen. Now, just so in different parts of his journey, he takes on different forms, is what I want to get to. When he gets into the Duat, which is often presented as the underworld or land of the dead, he takes on a ram-headed form. In some cases, it's Khnum. Sometimes it's just Ra with a ram's head. But pretty much what that represents, the name Khnum means the molder or the potter. In Kemetic myth, Khnum is the one who sculpts man from clay. So before a child enters his mother's womb, Khnum is the one who sculpts them on his potter's wheel. So with this, when Ra goes into the Duat, he takes on the identity as the molder. Now, this is where I'm going to disagree with a lot of other scholars. Is that I don't believe that the underworld is a land below ours. I believe that the Duat or the underworld simply refers to the quantum grid, which controls the natural world. Why do I believe that? The journey starts in the heavens. To go the underworld in comparison to the heavens is the earth. So the journey is actually a process from going from the heavens and entering into the earth. The journey starts in heaven. Now, if the journey started on earth and then he descended down, then he would be in a lower realm altogether. And in some cases, that is true. But I want to emphasize that this journey starts in heaven. So a fair amount of the time, we're dealing with the process of moving from heaven to earth. So what's happening here? When Ra's moving through the heavens, he's displaying his identity in the world that is already taken on his ideals. So in that place, he just gets to be a life. He just gets to be a light. He's just sustaining what is there because the heavens are already perfected and made in his image. But when he descends into the duat, the underworld, he takes on the form of the molder because this world still has work to do. So when divine consciousness enters into the natural world, it takes the place of something bringing about change in an unfinished world. So one of the greatest things that you can get from the journey of Ra is the chance that we have every single day. The fact that our journey starts in the heavens, and when we go into the earth, we have the opportunity to exercise our divine consciousness and change the world around us. Now, some days we win, some days we fail. That's why it's every day. There are no off days. And when you get to walk in your calling, uh, no, right? So the real journey, the real practice that you can get from this is to use every day as an opportunity, not just to stay in your divine consciousness, not just to stay in your divinity or recognize your divinity, but to begin to exert that divinity into the world around you. This in its own is what I teach as a part of the apostolic, which is making the earth look like heaven. That is what the mandate of Khnum really looks like. It's when divinity enters into a realm that's not like itself, it starts to take over. Now, remember, a pep represents carnality, the energy of the world, the consciousness of the world, a carnal consciousness. He represents Isfet. He's the worst of the worst. The worst consciousness, the lowest consciousness is really what a pep represents. And what you get is when dealing with a pep, it's this battle, right? Your identity is in your divinity. And you get to exercise yourself against your opposite to see if it can conform you. This is a perfect picture of being in the world and not of the world, having a greater effect on the world around you than the world can have on you. This is a process that we all go through. This is an experience that we all go through. And the opportunity is every day. So I'm going to wrap this up. I've done many lectures on this on Patreon. So if you're interested in more Kemetic teachings, yes, I'll be covering more on Tuesdays as this series continues, but there's already a ton available for you on Patreon. One of the other things I believe, so this is just so y'all can see, this is Khnum on his boat, right? He takes it's the master of the energy, the source of the energy and the mastery of it. It's the ability to have a divine blueprint. Because your origins are in the heavens, you have a heavenly blueprint to bring into a world that is not heavenly. So because your origins are in heaven, you're not really in a process of becoming divine. You realize that you are divine, and then you share that divinity with the carnal world around you. Hopefully this blesses you. It inspires you. It doesn't take many of us to change the world, but I believe this is a good place to start. Realizing that every day you have the opportunity to let the divinity that you are share itself with the world around you, and you begin to sculpt the world in your image. So for those of you who'd like to connect with me and some of the other things that I got going on, feel free, check out the website, caveofmystery.org. I have a few products on there, a few projects coming up, some events. All information's on the website. But that's it for this session. Until next time, y'all be blessed. Anke Ma'at, Hetepu.